Welcome, my friend, to the study. In fact, here we are visiting the realm of a lady. As spring touches the English countryside, let's look at the landscape where history meets legend. What better to illustrate this than an English rose, a ruined abbey, a ghost castle, and the love of a king? I speak of fair Rosamund, the legendary beauty, 12th century mistress of King Henry II. And as we look around Rosamund's chamber, we find some beautiful things with beautiful sounds. We have a golden thread that trails off to places unknown, a golden chalice, tapestry, crushed velvet, and of course our roses. Our story begins, however, not in England, but in France, with Eleanor of Aquitaine, a beautiful, spirited young girl. Eleanor was born oversaw all of southwestern France. Her grandfather was William IX, Duke of Aquitaine, known as France's first troubadour, a writer and performer of verse. Eleanor was a renowned beauty and enjoyed riding, accompanying her father on the administration of the duchy. She also loved poetry and was a patron of poets and authors all her life. When her father died in 1137, Eleanor became Duchess of Aquitaine, a very large part of what is modern France, and thereby one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in Western Europe. And thus the most vulnerable. Upon her father's death, she was but 15. Her guardian was the French king, Louis VI, who had her promptly married to his son, Louis, who became King Louis VII within weeks of their marriage, making Eleanor Queen of France. A rather bleak marriage. It yielded only 2 daughters, one who would become Marie de Champagne, the famous poet and patroness of the arts. Eleanor accompanied Louis on the Second Crusade to the Levant and took a key role, being a very intelligent and confident lady. After seeking an annulment, it was finally granted her, and Eleanor's marriage to Louis was dissolved in 1152, and Aquitaine was returned to her ownership. 2 months later, at 30 years of age, Eleanor married the English Duke of Normandy, Henry, 11 years her junior. Henry's father was the second husband of his mother, who had been widowed as the Empress of the Holy Roman Empire and daughter of the English King Henry I, a very strong woman in her own right. After Eleanor's marriage to Henry, he became King Henry II, and Eleanor became Queen of England, which gained and John Lackland, both whom she lived to see crowned. Eleanor was a highly intelligent woman who showed her capability to rule both Aquitaine and England effectively, and seems to have been a good mother, remaining close to all of her children. Henry, however, seems to have been a bad father, which formed one of the points of contention between them. Enter Rosamund Clifford, a beauty on whom Henry bestowed his affections. Rosamund is believed to have been the daughter of Lord Walter de Clifford, formerly Gautier fils Richard, of Clifford Castle, on the River Wye, in Herefordshire. The rose was one of the symbols for the Virgin Mary, hence the Latin term Rosamundi, Rose of the World, a phrase commonly found in church architecture and church bells in England. And it is possible that Rosamund was named after this fashion. Rosamund is thought to have met Henry around the time Eleanor was pregnant with their last child, John, who was born on the 24th of December, 1166, at Beaumont Palace in Oxford, the royal seat. By 1173, Eleanor was being held in confinement at Old Sarum Castle, having sided with her sons in rebellion against Henry. By some accounts, Henry acknowledged Rosamund as his mistress in 1174, and the royal manor at Woodstock, just north of Oxford, was the likely place of assignation. Henry ruled an empire that stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees, and had to be constantly moving to secure and administer his lands. Whether Rosamund stayed quietly at Woodstock while Henry travelled between England and his continental possessions, or whether she travelled with him as a member of the household, is unknown, leading many to conclude that the affair must have been short or very sporadic, or both. Rosamund died in 1176 and was buried at Godstow Abbey near Oxford, but not because Henry was there, more likely because her mother was buried there. Her tomb was initially placed in the front of the high altar, possibly to gain royal favour from the king for the monastery. However, 15 years later, Bishop Hugh of Lincoln told the nuns that the tomb must be moved out of the church because it was inappropriate that a harlot be buried there. Her tomb could be visited Rosamund's chapter house cemetery until it was destroyed in the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII. After her burial, Henry II, showing a special relationship with her burial place, was deeded patronal rights in Godstow, and in the ceremony of patronage at Godstow Abbey, he used a silk cloth described as a silken thread. As is often the way, legends seized upon this story. The 12th century was a time, too, when the legends of King Arthur were being appreciated and elaborated and written. So too did the tale of Rosamund the Fair, with a mingling of the Minotaur legend and medieval folk romances such as Beauty and the Beast, combining, as was the practice, the supernatural with the historical, the fantastical with the mundane, with everything from a scheming father to a beastly and lusty king. By the 14th century, legends were already circulating about a confrontation between Rosamund and Eleanor, and the horrible ways in which Eleanor took her revenge. And by the Tudor era, stories claimed that she had been murdered by Eleanor, depicting Eleanor as a harridan and Rosamund, the adulterous mistress, as the heroine. An underground labyrinth was added to the story in 1516, as well as a bower with gardens, a cloister, and a well. In fact, an elaborate pleasure garden was incorporated into the royal residence at Woodstock around Rosamund's time, and Henry's grandson even had a menagerie there. These pleasure gardens were adjacent to a room that only soon after is documented as being known as Rosamund's chamber. A confrontation between the queen and the mistress developed into a focal point of these stories, the cup of poison first appearing in a ballad of 1611. Indeed, it is said that before it was destroyed in the dissolution, Rosamund's tomb had a depiction of a chalice, which might have given rise to the poisoning episode. The Bower Pleasure Gardens, where Rosamund is said to have lived and been kept by Henry at Woodstock Castle, provides a most imaginative backdrop for all kinds of stories. Let's have a walk around the grounds where Woodstock Manor once stood and see if we can find some vestiges of Rosamund's power, and perhaps take in some of the atmosphere of this magical place that gives rise to stories and fantasy, and is full of nature in its everlasting beauty. Here we walk among these old and ancient trees, along the river climb. We see many old, knotted trees, oaks and firs and larches. Some of these trees date back almost 1,000 years and come down towards the spring known as Rosamund's Well, sparse in the springtime and more overgrown in the summer. Some of the pipework that was renovated here seems to have come from the time of Woodstock Manor. Today, the only thing left of Woodstock Manor is a stone plinth erected in the 20th century, overlooking the river that was dammed and made into a lake by the famous landscape architect Capability Brown, whose first name happened to have been Lancelot, lending more legend to this magical place. Indeed, Woodstock Palace began its life as a hunting lodge of Henry I, but it had great things in store. Henry's grandson, Henry II, spent much time there, holding councils and once even hosting a royal wedding. It was here that Henry had his first clash with Thomas Becket, and here where, after becoming king, Richard Lionheart and his brother, later King John, stayed too, coming 6 times in 1 year, and staying after signing the Magna Carta. Woodstock Palace saw many royal residents and visitors in its long lifetime, as well as jousting tournaments, and even once served as an incarceration for the future Queen Elizabeth I. However, it was in ruins by the end of the English Civil War, during which it had suffered badly. What was left of Woodstock Palace, and, as local legend has it, Rosamund's bower, was pulled down during the construction of Blenheim Palace, the manor having been given to John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough, by Queen Anne. There is a pool on the grounds known as Fair Rosamund's Well that is possibly the last vestige of the old palace extant. We are now going to look at the story of Fair Rosamund that gained much popularity in the Victorian era and the late 19th century, with pageants depicting Rosamund and Henry and Eleanor and Thomas Becket, and paintings by of the school of the pre-Raphaelites, such as this one by Frank Cupper, depicting Eleanor having followed the silken thread to find Rosamund, and the iconic Fair Rosamund by John William Waterhouse, depicting her in a blue robe as she gazes out of the window from her bower, waiting for Henry to come, her tapestry with the silken threads next to her, and the peering face of an onlooker, possibly a nun, a handmaid, or even Queen Eleanor, behind the curtain. As the story goes, in order to hide his tryst with Rosamund from the Queen, Henry met her within the innermost recesses of an intricate maze which he had built in his park at Woodstock Manor, and which could only be navigated by means of a silken thread. There was a secret bower, and a well where Rosamund bathed. Rumours were heard by Queen Eleanor, and so she contrived to penetrate the labyrinth. Finding the silken thread, she followed it to where she confronted Rosamund and forced her to choose between the dagger and a chalice of poison. The story goes that Rosamund chose the poison. This story has seen many developments and many guises over the centuries, including an opera by Donizetti that was only rediscovered in 1975. In Donizetti's storyline, Queen Eleanor offers Rosamund the chance to leave the country and never return. It ends in tragedy, however, as the story must, and Rosamund dies. The actual reason for her death is not known, though she did die young, which is perhaps one of the reasons that legends sprang up about her death. Though in the Middle Ages there were plenty of things that would shorten the life of even the strongest young person. The ruins of Godstow Priory, where Rosamund was buried, are still there today, with a sign for tourists that refers to the tomb of Fair Rosamund, upon which a 16th century traveller once noted a faded epitaph read, Hic yancet in tumba Rosamundi non Rosamunda, non redolet sed olet, quaere redolere solet. In essence, meaning, in this tomb lies a rose fair, but not pure. She no longer smells as sweet as she once did. The Ballad of Fair Rosamund, the flower of the world. When as King Henry ruled this land, the second of that name, besides the Queen, he dearly loved a fair and comely dame, most was her beauty found, her favour and her face. A sweeter creature in this world could never prince embrace. Her crisped locks, like threads of gold, appeared to each man's sight. Her sparkling eyes, like orient pearls, did cast a heavenly light. The blood within her crystal cheeks did such a colour drive, as though the lily and the rose for mastership did strive. Yet Rosamund, fair Rosamund, her name was called so, to whom our queen, Dame Eleanor, was known a deadly foe. For the king, therefore, for her defence against the furious queen, at Woodstock builded such a bower, the like was never seen. Most curiously that bower was built of stone and timber strong, 150 doors did to this bower belong, and they so cunningly contrived with turnings round about, that none but with a clue of thread could enter in and out. And so, my friend, we come to the end of the sad story of Rosamund Clifford the Fair. Thank you for taking this imaginative journey with me. I hope you've enjoyed the sounds, the soft sounds of Rosamund's chamber, the roses from her garden, the water from her bathing spring, and her chalice and golden thread. I hope you will come again to the study for more stories and history anytime you wish. Be good to yourself